Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 12. I hope that you all are staying safe and that you're healthy and that you're getting through this really challenging time as best as you can. I really miss seeing all of your faces. Again, I guess this is the next best thing. Today, we are going to talk about program development. So, I'm going to go over some announcements. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Program Development Agency Assessment Assignment, and then I'm going to give you some resources on program development to help you do that assignment. So just a reminder, your Program Development Agency assessment is due May 5th at midnight. This is a change on the syllabus, so we pushed back the due date for this assignment. So I just want to call your attention to that. The assignment description is posted in the week 12 checklist. And so I want to make sure that you read the assignment description so you see the rubric, and then there's a template for the assignment. So for the assignment, you'll fill out the template, and that also is posted in the week 12 checklist on D2L. So let's talk about program development. I think that this is a really fun topic. I hope that you're going to enjoy this as well. I want to draw a distinction here. So when I'm talking about program development, what I really mean is how organizations decide what kinds of services they're going to offer and how they are going to administer them. So sometimes programs develop completely out of nothing, like there's a brand new need, so an agency decides they're going to develop a brand new program or service to meet that need. And sometimes programs develop out of something that already exists. So there might be a service that an agency is already offering, and they're going to expand it or shrink it down or take it in a different direction in order to meet needs. And so obviously, there is a really strong link between how services are developed and administered and how they're funded. So that's why we're talking about program development in a fundraising course, is because you really should not separate those two things, that there should always be thinking about how are you going to pay for these services and these programs that an agency is offering, because as we all know, nothing is free. So we always need to be thinking about that funding component when we're thinking about what kinds of services an organization is going to be offered and how are they going to be offered and how are they going to be administered. So to give you an example of program development, I'm going to use a case example of a program that I developed when I was working for NAMI Minnesota. And so I'm going to go through step by step, almost the exact same steps that you're going to fill out for your program development agency assessment assignment. And so I'm going to talk about how I used that sort of template to develop this program. And so the program we're going to talk about is focused on NAMI Dakota County. NAMI Dakota County is a local affiliate of NAMI Minnesota. So they're kind of like a mini NAMI chapter just focused on Dakota County. Dakota County is covers like Burnsville, Eagan, Apple Valley, parts of West St. Paul. So it's kind of like the South Metro area. And so NAMI Dakota County has services to support people who live with a mental illness and their families. And one of the services that NAMI Dakota County was providing before I started at NAMI Minnesota was an emergency fund. So they had a very small pool of money that they were using to give funds directly to individuals who live with mental illnesses who needed sort of stopgap funds to cover costs for basic needs, for things that they couldn't get covered through other types of assistance. And so when I started with NAMI, NAMI Dakota County had identified that their emergency fund is one of their most important programs, and they were really interested in expanding it. So I worked with NAMI Dakota County to develop this program and to really grow it and expand it. So that's kind of the background about what I'm going to be using as a case example as I go through each step of the planning process. So the first things you're going to want to think about when you're planning a new program is the purpose and need. So this is really, why does your agency need to provide this service or program? What's the purpose? What's the need in the community that you're meeting? So for the case example with the NAMI Dakota County Emergency Fund, the purpose of the program was to help people who live with mental illnesses meet their basic needs. And we had found that there was really a high need for this program for a couple of reasons. And we had both actual research that we cited from outside sources, and we had our own anecdotal evidence. And because many people who are on the NAMI Dakota County board are people who have personal experience of living with a mental illness, people had their own lived experience to reinforce the need for this program. So a lot of people who live with serious mental illnesses also can have trouble having a job. A lot of them live in poverty. So there's a very high correlation there. Obviously, that is not always the case, but it often happens that people who have really serious mental illnesses also don't have a lot of money, and because they don't have a lot of money, they often have trouble getting their needs met. And so there are lots of services that already exist in the community to help people meet their basic needs, and we certainly did not want to duplicate any of those programs. So that's really important when you're thinking about starting a new service, is are you going to be duplicating something that already exists? And if you are, is that a good use of resources? So in this case with NAMI Dakota County, they had decided that they were really not duplicating any existing efforts, because there are a lot of ways for people to get basic needs met through county services, through general assistance programs, but there are a lot of gaps in those. And so they were seeing that the kinds of things that people were asking them for funding for were things that they really couldn't get funded anywhere else. So we had things like helping to pay an application fee for an apartment, or helping to pay a phone bill or an internet bill, or we did a lot of gift cards for groceries to help people. And they really weren't able to get those needs met anywhere else. So we decided that the primary purpose of the program is to give direct financial assistance to people who live with mental illnesses, and that there really was a significant need in the community for this. So the next things you're going to want to think about is who the program is going to serve, and how is your program going to serve them. So again, we had already identified that our target population for this program was people who live with mental illnesses. And then we defined it a little bit further, that we were only going to serve people who live in Dakota County. And so one of the things that we had to think about when we were defining the target population is again, in addition to a lot of folks who live with serious mental illnesses are also experiencing poverty, a lot of those folks are also experiencing homelessness. And so we had to think about, well, if we are only serving Dakota County residents, how are we thinking about people who are currently homeless? And so we had kind of decided that we would allow people to self-select. So if someone didn't have a permanent address, but they felt like they resided in Dakota County, then we would allow that. So we had a little bit of wiggle room there. And so we had to think about how we were going to implement this program. And so we decided that we were going to partner with case managers and have case managers fill out an application on behalf of their clients in order to receive these funds. And the purpose of that is we just had to put some logistics around this project. As you can imagine, if you are giving away money, a lot of people want that. There's a very high demand for that kind of service. And so we had decided that if we're partnering with case managers, that helps us logistically narrow things down. It also helps us because the real intention of this program is to fill needs that could not be met anywhere else by any other type of assistance. And we felt like having a case manager apply on behalf of their client was a good way to kind of make that selection criteria for us. So we felt like if someone was connected to a case manager and a case manager was saying, my client has exhausted all their resources, there's no other possible way for my client to pay for whatever their need was, then that truly was the case. And so that was just kind of something we used as a litmus test to evaluate the requests for these emergency funds. And so we had a grant application, just a simple one-page application where the case manager filled out yes or no, does this person live with a mental illness? Does this person live in Dakota County? What is the need and how much is the need for? And then we also set some parameters around how much the grant could be for. So we decided that we were going to give grants up to $50 and we were going to encourage gift cards. So we had gift cards for a variety of different places that people could shop. The most popular ones, of course, were Cub, Target, Walmart, and then gas cards. But we also gave cash as well for needs that didn't fit neatly into those categories. And we decided to cap it at $50, again, because logistically we felt like that was reasonable based on the amount of money that we had to give people. So the next thing that we needed to think about was the funding aspect. So we had to think about how much this program is going to cost, what resources we need, and how it was going to be sustainable. So when we were thinking about how much it would cost to expand this program, we actually had the opportunity to apply for a grant from the St. Paul Foundation. So the St. Paul Foundation had put out a request for programs for services that were giving financial aid directly to families. And so that really perfectly aligned with the program that we were trying to develop. So it was just a really perfect opportunity for us. So we had applied for the grant and we received the grant in the amount of $20,000. And so when we applied for the grant, we had to come up with our budget for what this program was going to cost. And as I had previously mentioned, we were expecting to give up to $50 per person. So that helped us think about how many people we could serve in this program. And we also included some administrative expenses as well. So we were doing a lot of mailing. So we were using Surface Mail to send either checks or gift cards to the case managers who were then giving those resources to their clients. So we included some funding for postage and printing. And we really didn't include any other expenses in our budget for this. So this kind of relates to number 6, what resources other than funding do you need for the program? So we didn't include any staff time or budget for staff in our program costs. So when we were applying for this grant, we didn't really reflect the true cost of the program because obviously there was staff time involved in administering this. So there was staff time involved in doing outreach to case managers to tell them about this program. There was staff time involved in processing the requests that came in and sending out gift cards and checks. There was also time spent from our office manager to help purchase the gift cards and help with the accounting piece for this. And there was time for our grants manager who helped to do the reports for this grant. So we really did have quite a lot of staff investment in this program. And so NAMI ended up covering all of the staff time that was spent on this program with our general operating fund. So we did take that is something that you need to consider when you're developing a program, is if you're having staff work on it, where is the funding for that staff time coming from? We also had volunteers and community partnerships as part of this program. So obviously we worked with case managers from a lot of different organizations in Dakota County. So that was really critical to have those relationships in place in order to make this successful, because obviously we needed the buy-in from the case managers and their understanding in order to be able to distribute these funds to their clients. And then we also needed buy-in from the NAMI Dakota County Board, who are all volunteers who helped to administer this program. And then I actually had an intern who worked on this program. So we had some unpaid people power working on this in addition to our paid staff time on this. And so those partnerships and that people power was really important. And then we didn't need a ton of supplies for this. NAMI had lots of envelopes and paper. So the program supplies, what we had to purchase was very minimal. Postage was probably our biggest supply expense for this program. And then one of the last things, or maybe not the last thing, one of the things that you'll need to incorporate when you're thinking about developing a program is how the organization is going to sustain this program into the future, assuming that the program is intended to be sustained indefinitely. So this really depends on how long you think your program is going to run. So are you doing a program that is going to be kind of like a one-time thing, a one and done, or are you doing something that you see can be meeting a need in the community long term? So as I had mentioned, for this specific case example, we had applied for a grant to really get it started. Previously, NAMI Dakota County was just doing their own fundraising through the NAMI Walk. And so they had a very small pool of money that they were doing this project from, and they really needed to expand it. So we got the grant. And in the grant, we were allowed to apply for it for 3 years, but we could not apply for the same amount for 3 years. So we first received $20,000, and then the second year we were eligible for $12,000, and then we were eligible for even less the third year. So we had to think about how were we going to continue to sustain this, or was this going to be just like a one-time influx of cash that we were able to offer this one time? So after we started doing the program in the first few months, we realized that we really needed this to be sustainable long-term. The response we had from case managers was huge, that we had so many case managers who were so happy that we were able to offer these funds, and had a lot of evidence that it was really making a difference in the lives of their clients. So we decided that we really did not want to offer less money every consecutive year, that we really wanted to keep the level of funding consistent and very high as much as possible year over year, so that we didn't have to be denying any requests. We had a lot of evidence from our case managers who we did an evaluation with that these funds really helped to lift up their clients, that just a little influx of cash for some of them really allowed them to do things like get a job, make ends meet. It really helped to boost them up, even though it was just a small influx of cash. So I worked with NAMI Dakota County to boost up their own fundraising efforts, which they were previously doing, but not really spending a ton of time on. And so this really gave them a lot of motivation to increase their fundraising efforts. So I encouraged them to use, again, the NAMI Walk as their main fundraiser. And the purpose of that is because they were already doing the NAMI Walk. It was just doing it a little bit better and more efficiently so that they could raise the difference in grant funds that were decreasing, and so then they were increasing their own fundraising efforts. And so I worked with them to secure sponsorships from local businesses that really helped offset some of the difference. But one of the things that we kind of failed to plan for is NAMI Dakota County wasn't really able to make up the full difference. So they ended up having to decrease the amount that they were giving out year over year. So that was something that we didn't really do a good enough job of planning for, but is something that is really important when you're thinking about planning a program. So I want to talk about ethics because there's a lot of ethical dilemmas in program development. So the first one that I want to think about is things evolve really quickly. So one of the things that you need to think about when you're developing a program is, are you meeting a current need, and do you really have the evidence to show that there is indeed a need for your service? Like I mentioned before, you don't always want to be duplicating a service that already exists. So sometimes it's better to partner with an organization that already has an existing service than it would be to suck resources for your own organization to duplicate work that someone else is doing. So this again kind of it's important to share resources with other organizations. And so just because your organization sees a need, it doesn't mean that that nobody's working on that need. There might be other organizations that are working on that. And so sometimes I see organizations that aren't stopping and slowing down and kind of surveying the landscape to see, is someone else already meeting this need? They just jump into doing their own program where they could really have benefited from partnering with another organization that might have been an expert on that subject. We already talked a little bit about building sustainable programs. So I want to talk about that in conjunction with closing a program. So sometimes in program development, you need to think about, how is your program going to live in perpetuity? But you also need to think about, sometimes the wise decision is to close a program, either because there is no more need for it, or the circumstances have changed and maybe now there's a different organization that is taking the lead on that service. But either way, programs need to be closed in an ethical way. So an example of that would be Crisis Connection, which is a program that closed maybe about a year and a half ago. Crisis Connection was a phone number that served Minnesota, that people experiencing a mental health crisis could call statewide, and then they could get connected to resources in their local community. And so the phone number was staffed by counselors who were trained, who were experts in local resources, and it was one number for the entire state. And so as you can imagine, this was a great resource for us to have. It was really, really heavily used. At NAMI, we gave this phone number out all the time. There are local versions of this, but when you are in a crisis, it's sometimes hard to remember, okay, I am having a crisis and I'm in Hennepin County right now, so the Hennepin County number is blah. The nice thing about Crisis Connection is that it was one number for the entire state. So no matter where you were, you didn't have to remember, okay, now I'm in this county, so now the number is whatever. Instead of thinking about 87 different numbers for 87 different counties, it's just one number for the entire state. And so Crisis Connection had run out of funding, and they closed very suddenly and without a lot of warning or thinking about how that service was going to transfer to something else. So this really left a lot of organizations, NAMI included, scrambling to figure out how were we going to continue to serve our clients who had been relying on this phone number, and that we had been promoting this phone number and giving it out and people knew about it. And so now suddenly we were needing to shift the service that we were referring to, and there were not a lot of good options for that. And we had to get people educated on those not a lot of good options very quickly. So that's an example of a program that closed and kind of left everyone in an ethical dilemma of what to do, and was maybe not closed in the most ethical way. And then, of course, I want to talk about mission drift, which I know we've talked about before in previous weeks. But when we're developing a program, we want to make sure that it's in line with the mission of your organization. So sometimes people can get really excited about new programs and new services, and there's new funding streams for them. But you want to make sure, is this the best fit for my organization? So this kind of goes along with what I talked about first with the rapid change and the rapid development, that things can kind of get a little off track sometimes. So you need to think about, like, is my organization the best for this program? So for example, in the case of NAMI Dakota County, we felt like the emergency fund fit really well with the mission of NAMI, which is to serve people who live with mental illnesses and their family members. And so NAMI doesn't provide any direct service. They don't do any counseling or therapy or things like that. They do advocacy and education, and providing these little mini grants was a way that they could really serve the community in a meaningful way. Nobody else was doing this, and it fit really well with what they had. So that's an example of a program that fit really well and really aligned with the mission. But that doesn't always happen. That sometimes programs are developed because an agency is chasing money, chasing a grant, sees a need and decides that they're going to take the lead on it, even if they might not be the best agency or a best poised, or they might not be the right experts in a particular field to offer a given service. So those are some things that are really important to keep in mind when we're talking about program development. So that's all I've got for you. I hope that that's enough for you to get started on your program agency assessment assignment. As always, if you have any questions, please call or text me. I really hope that you all are doing well and that you're staying safe and healthy. And I will talk to you again later. Bye, everyone.